We can just imagine the conversation. The Prime Minister, Minister, how are we going to avoid being found guilty again of breaking ethics laws? Oh, Prime Minister, I'll appoint my sister-in-law to decide, and we'll discuss every case around the dinner table. Oh, what a great idea. I love appointing members of our family and friends as independent officials to investigate us. The only problem is, after appointing 3 people who are friends and family, have we exhausted the list of friends and family members for these positions?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. The Interim Ethics Commissioner is a career public servant who has served in a senior role in the Ethics Commissioner's office for more than 10 years, beginning when the Harper government was actually in office. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Liberals love to suck up to big oligopolistic corporations that raise prices on consumers and make life less affordable. They get lots of support from the NDP for this corporatist agenda. And lately, they've been on a real ride. Today, they announced that they think that there's too much competition in the wireless and in the internet business, and they've allowed for a massive merger. When will they start standing up for consumers instead of standing up for price-raising and high-cost corporate oligarchs?
The Honourable Minister for Science, Innovation and Industry.
Madam Speaker, we will take no lessons from these conservatives and from this leader, that's for sure. Madam Speaker, we listen to Canadians, and I think they should do that a bit more often. Canadians have told us one thing: they want lower prices. The way to have lower prices, Madam Speaker, is through competition. The way to have more competition is to have a strong fourth national player that will bring prices down. That's why, Madam Speaker, the transfer of license will go forward with 21 conditions. They have made a contract with Canadians which is enforceable and with penalties. That's what Canadians want. They want lower prices.
The Leader of the Opposition.
And yet their policy on energy is to deliberately raise prices. At midnight tonight, actually 12:01 to be precise, the carbon tax will rise on gas, heat, and groceries. Now, they originally said it would cost less, but just yesterday, a report from their own parliamentary budget officer demonstrated that the 80% of Canadians will pay more in tax, on average $1,500 more. Tomorrow morning, they're going to wake up to higher prices. It is April Fool's Day, and the joke will be on Canadians. Why won't they cancel this tax?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. And much as the opposite bench would like to deny it, climate change is real. And you know what, Madam Speaker, you know what else is real? The checks that are going to be arriving in people's mailboxes over the next few weeks. It'll mean $1,000 to my residents in Manitoba, Madam Speaker. Those checks will arrive quarterly. It's going to help with affordability, Madam Speaker. It's going to help with cash flow. The Conservatives are doing nothing for affordability, and they're certainly doing nothing on climate change. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
It's been 3 years since Jay Killer went on a rampage in Nova Scotia. We now know of the incredible incompetence at the top of the RCMP that has raged on ever since the Prime Minister took office. He named an incompetent commissioner, and he's tried to destroy our national police force with deadly consequences. Worse yet, his commission ignored the victims, and he's done nothing to reverse the original cause of the violence in the first place. Will the Prime Minister reverse the damage he's done so that Canadians can live in safety and peace?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And although the work of the Commission has concluded, we know that the grief and loss of the families and communities will remain forever. Yesterday, we received the report from the Commission. It's a roadmap to pursue necessary changes, whether within the RCMP, whether with regard to semi-automatic firearms or gender-based violence. We will work closely with all involved to pursue these reforms, because that's what Canadians expect and deserve, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
On Tuesday, I said that there was a crisis with stabbings across the country. People being stabbed in broad daylight. The Prime Minister stood up and said, don't worry, he's going to ban hunting rifles, even though that it's knives that do stabbing and not hunting rifles. It's not the Inuit hunter in Nunavut who's causing stabbings in downtown Vancouver. All of these facts angered and frustrated the Prime Minister. He became visibly upset and ran out the back door. He has not been back since. The Prime Minister was obviously frightened and concerned by that debate.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition knows the rules and that we do not mention presence or absence in the House.
The question is the Prime Minister okay, and will he ever be back in the House of Commons to debate me?
I have asked the honourable member to be wary of the rules, and the honourable member repeated the comments that he knows are against the rules. We will take one question out of the next round of Conservative questions. The honourable member for l'honorable député de Manicouagan.
Madame la Présidente, le GIEC.
Madam Speaker, the IPCC just tabled its summary report on climate change, which it described as a survival guide for humanity. Greenpeace said that this is the final wake-up call for the next 7 years, and those years are going to have an impact on millennia. Yet the federal budget still offers $37 billion in subsidies to fossil fuels. Ottawa is still trying to greenwash pollution from dirty energy. When will the federal government understand that its short-sighted budgets risk ruining the planet for millennia? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of the Environment.
Speaker, thanks to the Honourable Member for the question. And all members of this House know that we're working very, very hard to reduce emissions from the oil and gas sector. Madam Speaker, we are going to be capping oil and gas emissions. We will be implementing a clean fuel standard, a clean electricity standard. And Madam Speaker, we're going to be investing in carbon capture and storage. And very, very importantly, Madam Speaker, we are going to be eliminating fossil fuel subsidies. We're going to be doing that 2 years in advance of the predicted schedule.
Honorable député de Manicouagan.
Madame la Présidente, non seulement ce budget.
Madam Speaker, not only does this budget not reduce fossil fuel production, it relies on climate change to extract fossil fuels from the Arctic in the future. Équiterre said that they're deeply concerned about planned investments for future offshore oil and gas development in the Arctic. Greenpeace said that they remain concerned about new subsidies to oil and gas companies who are already making money hand over fist. When will Canada stop dragging the world to ruin for oil companies' profits? The Honourable Minister of Tourism. Madam Speaker, I'd like to thank my honourable colleague for the question. If we look at the facts, our government has already invested over $100 billion in the clean economy of this country. In the budget tabled this week, we are betting on increasing clean electricity capacity throughout the country. We're going to use hydrogen to have another source of clean energy. We are here to build the economy of the future with Canadian workers, and we will continue to use.
The Honourable Member for New Westminster Burnaby.
With increased prices, Canadians are turning to this government to make their lives more affordable. But the Liberals are abandoning families over and over. They've approved a merger between Rogers and Shaw, which means Canadians are going to pay more for cell phone and internet. And we already pay among the highest prices in the world. Liberals are letting businesses get rich on the backs of Canadian families. Why did the government abandon Canadians this way?
The
Honourable Minister of Innovation. Madam Speaker, I thank my colleague for his question, but I think he missed this morning's press conference. What we said this morning is that Canadians asked us for one thing, which was to lower prices for telecommunications in Canada. One way to do that is to have competition, and that means we need a national fourth player. Not only will we have a fourth player, we imposed 21 conditions with an unprecedented measures for Canadians. And this will lower prices in Canada. Thank you.
For Windsor West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I know the minister has said he's going to watch this deal, a Frankenstein deal, like a hawk, but he's left Canadian consumers to the buzzards. In fact, this minister has given the green light to Rogers and at the same time given the red light to his own industry committee and to the Competition Bureau that's been opposed to this. For decades, Liberal and Conservative governments have allowed these massive telco companies to make huge profits off the backs of hardworking Canadians. This is a disaster that will end with less competition, massive layoffs, and higher prices. Why have the Liberals thrown in the towel, sided with the telco CEOs, and are sticking Canadian families with higher prices and the bell?
The Honourable Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry.
Madam Speaker, I have enormous respect for my colleagues, but we gave the red light. We did not approve the transfer of license from Shaw to Rogers, Madam Speaker. That was very clear what we did. Instead, we listened to Canadians, something that everyone in this House should do. The Canadians have told us one thing: bring prices down. More competition, and the way to do that in Canada is to have a fourth national player, Madam Speaker. That's why we impose conditions, because we want lower prices for Canadians, and we'll be watching them like a hawk, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Dauphin, Swan River, Nipawin.
Madam Speaker,
the Honourable Member for Dauphin, Swan River, Nipawin.
Point of order.
I did advise the members that I was going to take the next question out of the members, and I'm taking it out because the next question would be then. One moment. As the members know, it is the prerogative of the chair to determine who the next speaker is, and my prerogative is to choose the Honourable Member for Dauphin, Swan River, Nipawin.
Madam Speaker, the Liberals are tripling their carbon tax, and tonight at midnight they will carry out their plan by raising the carbon tax again. Gas is going up, home heating is going up, and groceries are going up. Gladys emailed me the other day saying she can't afford this tax hike. We cannot afford more useless taxes, she said. Will the Liberals stand up for Canadians like Gladys and cancel their plans to increase the carbon tax tonight at midnight?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. The honourable member is from my home province of Manitoba, and he will know that Manitobans will receive $1,000 in climate rebate checks over the next year. They'll receive those checks quarterly, Madam Speaker. But the honourable member also will know that there's a cost of climate change. We in Manitoba have had 2 1 in 300-year floods costing $1 billion each. Agriculture has been dramatically impacted, Madam Speaker. We've had 1,700 people driven from their homes in floods, Madam Speaker. There's a cost to climate change, and we are addressing.
Honourable Member for Peace River, Westlock. I know the writing of the Honourable Member. The Honourable Member for Cypress Hills, Grasslands.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. As farmers look to begin seeding, input costs are top of mind. They've already been losing tons of money under the carbon tax, but the Liberals are going to raise it again at midnight tonight. What makes it worse is that the Minister of Agriculture just voted this week against an exemption for on-farm fuels. Even the Liberal chair for the Agriculture Committee voted with Conservatives. He gets it. So why does the Minister keep voting against farmers and support increasing the carbon tax at midnight tonight?
L'honorable secrétaire
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Agriculture.
I'm glad to hear my colleague talk about input costs. Input costs have risen, and not because of any taxes, just because of demand. And I hope that the honourable member will support the budget as we have increased interest-free advance payment programs up to $350,000, something their members have supported in the past, and I hope that they'll support the budget.
The Honourable Member for Peace River West Loch.
Madam Speaker, Conservatives know that technology, not carbon taxes, will improve our environment. And yet, every time Conservatives question the carbon tax or point out the costs, Liberals stand out and point out some person who's lost their house in a recent fire, flood, or hurricane as a reason to raise the carbon tax. The carbon tax will only make these people poorer. And now the Liberals tell us that effective tonight, they will be raising the carbon tax again. When will they cancel this disastrous plan?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And again, as I said yesterday, something's not sinking in. Actually, the climate rebate will make 8 out of 10 families better off. That is in PBO report, Madam Speaker. But, Madam Speaker, you know what won't leave people better off is investing in cryptocurrency. I gave the Leader of the Opposition 2-3 times to apologize for his very reckless advice to Canadians, Madam Speaker. But it really underlines, Madam Speaker, that the opposition has no plan for the economy, no plan for the environment, and certainly no plan for climate change.
The Honourable Member for Oshawa.
Madam Speaker, while the Prime Minister stays in swanky $6,000 a night hotel, struggling with just one butler, Sue, a senior in my riding, sees herself working 3 days a week. Why? Because this costly NDP Liberal coalition is set to raise their carbon tax again at midnight, meaning that Sue and all Canadians are going to pay more for heating, eating, driving, and living. Perhaps they should focus on a real climate plan instead of punishing Canadians with a carbon tax. Why won't this costly coalition...
The Honourable Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Well, Madam Speaker, it's really puzzling. Every single person on that side of the aisle campaigned in 2021 on putting a price on pollution. Stephen Harper was in favor of a carbon tax before he was against it. The member for Wellington-Halton Hills made it the centerpiece of his leadership campaign in 2017. And the MP for Pitt Meadows, Maple Ridge, as a member of the BC government, actually introduced the first carbon price in North America. Madam Speaker, the Conservatives need to stop flip-flopping, get serious about climate change, and present their own plan.
The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. Madam Speaker, tonight at midnight, it's going to be very bad news for Canadians. The Liberal carbon tax is going to go up. And this will have a direct impact on all Canadian families, as demonstrated yesterday by the Parliamentary Budget Officer. It will cost more for transportation, food, heating. Why is the government punishing Canadian families and workers yet again? The Honourable Minister of Tourism. Madam Speaker, my honourable colleague knows full well that this does not apply to Quebec. Quebec is a leader when it comes to managing clean energy. What we can say is that every time we've lowered taxes on workers, what the Conservatives did, what did they do? They voted against it. They voted against lower taxes for workers, against reducing taxes for Canadians. In this budget, we already know they're going to vote against workers. They're the ones who are voting against them, and we're supporting them. The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. This government clearly demonstrated that it's not in contact with reality on the ground. There's a transportation group well established in Quebec that said that March 15th last year in an interview with the Journal de Québec that it's going to have a direct impact on British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba. Not only do they not know what they're talking about, but it's going to cost more for all Canadians, including Quebecers. The Honourable Member for Trois-Rivières, or rather, sorry. What should be clearly said for Canadians is that climate change has a cost. We remember the fires at Fort McMurray. We remember the flooding in Calgary. We remember the flooding from one end of the country to the next. We need to fight climate change. And the best mechanism that we have in our system is to have a price on pollution so that we can fight climate change. Economists say so. That's what we're implementing, and we're going to fight climate change. The Honourable Member for Trois-Rivières, Madam Speaker, if there's one position that should be above any appearance of conflict of interest, it's the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner. The Liberals have proven yet again that they have not a shred of judgment by appointing the minister's sister-in-law on an interim basis. We're not questioning this person's competence or probity. The Cabinet is at fault, however, each and every single one of them, for choosing a family member to fill this position. The appearance of a conflict of interest is obvious. Do they even know what one is? Let's ask the Liberals to reconsider this appointment. Will they?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, Madam Speaker, I would emphasize the interim Ethics Commissioner is a career public servant who has served in a senior role in the Ethics Commissioner's office for more than 10 years. Madam Speaker, that's beginning when the Harper government was actually in office.
Le député de Trois-Rivières.
Madam Speaker, this is just one more in a long list of Liberal ethical lapses. For the Chinese interference file, they appointed the Prime Minister's cottage neighbour as special rapporteur. For the Ottawa Protest Convoy Commission, they appointed a former Liberal employee. Today, as Ethics Commissioner, they appoint sister-in-law of a Liberal minister. No one's questioning the competence of these individuals, but why is it that every single Liberal appointment out of 39 million Canadians, is it always someone with Liberal connections?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, Madam Speaker, once again, what I'd like to be able to do is put an emphasis on the importance of recognizing the fine work that our civil servants do, and just say that interim Ethics Commissioner that's being referenced is a career public servant who has served in a senior role in the Ethics Commissioner's office for more than 10 years, beginning when the Harper government was actually in office, Madam Speaker. We owe a great deal to our professional civil servants. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Bay of Quinte.
Madam Speaker, Canadians pay the highest cell phone prices in the world. In fact, Rogers Telecommunications is the most expensive telecommunication carrier in the whole of the world. How expensive? 3 times as expensive as Australia, twice as expensive as the US and Europe. The Rogers-Shaw deal will only make the priciest company and the most biggest only bigger. We need more competition in Canada, which means not just a 4th carrier, but 40 carriers to supply more choice to Canadians and lower prices. When will this minister get serious about competition instead of pandering to just one monopoly?
Yeah. The Honourable Minister of Science, Innovation and Industry.
Madam Speaker, I'm very pleased for the question of my colleague. Perhaps he did not fully listen to the press conference this morning because, in fact, if he looks at the contract, the prices that you see in Quebec, which are on average 20% lower than in the rest of Canada, now will have to be offered in Ontario, in Manitoba, in British Columbia, in Alberta. In Western Canada, Madam Speaker, in addition to that, we got commitments to have a headquarter in Alberta, in Calgary, and 3,000 new jobs in Western Canada. Canadians know that we have their back, and Western Canadians understand that.
The Honourable Member for South Shore, for South Shore St. Margaret's.
In fact, Videotron's prices are higher than Freedom. So if Liberals really believed in competition, they would have let a competitive bidding process happen for Freedom. These Liberals are in the back pocket of Rogers. They allowed Rogers to ignore 3 higher bidders for Freedom. These Liberals in PMO were lobbied more than 60 times by Videotron and Rogers during the sale process, but did not meet once with any other bidder. Why did Rogers get privileged access to these Liberals that other bidders did not?
Honourable Minister for Innovation, Science and Industry.
Madam Speaker, I have enormous respect for my colleague and my critic, but one thing you would know as the regulator, you don't meet with the parties, Madam Speaker. That's a basic principle in due process. You don't meet with the parties, Madam Speaker. But what Canadians understood this morning, and particularly Western Canadians, is that we have their back, Madam Speaker, because what they want is to have lower prices. The way to do that is to have competition, and the way to do that is for a 4th national player. For members on the other side who may not have a chance, read the contracts with Canadian. That's the way that you bring lower prices in Canada.
The Honourable Member for South Shore St. Margaret's.
Minister only needs to check the lobbyist registry to see more than 65 meetings with his department and PMO. In December, this Liberal minister said he would not rule on the sale until the legal challenges were over. There is a legal challenge before the CRTC currently on this deal when Rogers providing preferential rates to Videotron for access to their network that no other cell phone provider can get. Why has this minister flip-flopped on his commitment to wait for the legal challenges to be over? Is it because Rogers set today as the deadline?
Oh, the Honourable Minister.
Madam Speaker, I'm so happy that my colleagues asked questions, by the way. I look forward to more questions because one thing that people at home understand is that we're fighting at every step of the way to bring prices lower in Canada, Madam Speaker. What we have achieved today is a new chapter in telecom in Canada. For the first time in Canada's history, more than 150 years, you have binding legal commitments by the Telco in a contract with Canadians to bring prices lower in Canada, Madam Speaker. And this is this government who did that. Canadians know we have their back. We'll fight for them at every step of the way.
Honorable député de Montmorency, Lillet, Kamouraska, Rivière-du-Loup.
Madam Speaker, today the Minister of Innovation and Industry announced the merger between Rogers and Shaw in telecommunications. And Videotron, another company involved, has to lower its prices in Quebec, but has imposed no other conditions in other businesses involved in this transaction. Why? The Honourable Minister. I thank my colleague for his question. It's relatively simple. When one's the regulator and there's two parties, that's where you can get commitments from Videotron and Rogers. But Canadians understand that if we have pressure on prices with Videotron in Western Canada, it will lead other telecommunications companies to lower their prices as well, because we know it's by increasing competition that we can lower prices. And that's exactly what we did for Canadians today.
Honourable Member for Timmins, James Bay.
Madam Speaker, I've been speaking with energy workers, miners, auto workers, innovators who are more than ready to make Canada a world leader in clean energy. But to get cheap and renewable energy to market requires massive investments in the national energy grid. Now, New Democrats have worked with this government, and we have pushed this government to get serious about sustainable jobs that are tied to obligations for good union wages and apprenticeships. So what kind of funding will the government put in place to build the electricity grid that Canadians need for sustainable 21st century?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Natural Resources.
Madam Speaker, I'm very happy that the member opposite asked that question, because this budget that we tabled this week shows exactly our commitment to a strong, sustainable electrical grid. And we know that union workers, good-paying jobs are part of that work that we need to get done. We are supporting strong, sustainable jobs right across this country, and we know that our union workers are at the backbone of the work we need to do.
The Honourable Member for Victoria.
Madam Speaker, Canadians want to see their government take leadership on tackling the climate crisis and creating good union jobs. So New Democrats forced the Liberals to do just that in this year's budget. But more needs to be done. For 8 years, the Liberals have missed the mark by handing out billions to rich oil and gas CEOs who are jacking up prices for people and polluting our planet. So will the Liberals finally stand up to big oil, eliminate fossil fuel subsidies, and create a green industrial strategy?
The Honourable Minister of Labour.
Madam Speaker, I think the budget speaks for itself. I would say forced is a little harsh. Some of us have been on this for quite some time in making sure that workers are at the center of this energy transition that's occurring. That involves not only the building up of renewables, but also in lowering emissions in the oil and gas sector itself. It is Canada's largest industry. It is something that we cannot ignore. And the only ones who know how to lower emissions and the only ones who know how to build up renewables are the workers in those industries. Not only do we support them, but we will insist that they lead this transition everywhere from across this country. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Châteauguay-Lacolle.
The Honourable Member for Châteauguay-Lacolle. Transgender Day of Visibility, let us stand up for the protection and promotion of the human rights of people in Canada who are transgender, queer, non-binary, and two-spirit. Can the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Women and Gender Equality and Youth share what our government is doing to uplift transgender voices and be allies to the transgender community?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
I thank the Honourable Member for her question. On this day, I'm thinking of Emma Wakelin, a trans woman who shared that it feels like every day we awake to a new law being proposed that is stripping us of our human rights, or more violence that extinguishes yet another life. As the trans community faces attacks against their identity, their dignity, and their existence, we as a government will continue to stand with them today and every day. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Lakeland. The Honourable Member for Lakeland.
Liberals chose a top minister's family member as the interim ethics commissioner. Of course, they give millions of tax dollars and contracts to close friends and staff's relatives, and this prime minister is the only one ever to break ethics laws twice. So his MPs have too, 4 more times for vacations and perks for their pals. You know, after 8 years, Canadians have never struggled so much, but Liberals have never had it so good. So is that why the Liberals thought the Canadians wouldn't see their ethics pick as anything other than trying to cover their own butts in the future?
Yeah. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. It's actually a very simple answer for the member opposite. The interim ethics commissioner is a career public servant who has served in a senior role in the ethics commissioner's office for more than 10 years. And that began, Madam Speaker, when the Harper government was actually in office.
Honourable Member for North Okanagan, Shuswap.
We should all remember Clam Scam, when the then Fisheries Minister was found guilty of the ethics breach for awarding a $24 million license to a company to be ran by his wife's cousin. Wow. Now the Liberals have appointed the same cabinet minister's sister-in-law as the ethics commissioner. Really, Madam Speaker, through you, can they only find family and insiders willing to work for them? Or is this another attempt to censor disclosure of their ongoing ethics issues? Which is it?
Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. The Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs recused himself from all deliberations and decisions related to the appointment of the interim Ethics Commissioner.
The Honourable Member for Wellington, Halton Hills.
Speaker, members of this House have worked for years on funding and governance for the Great Lakes Fisheries Commission. As a result, the budget last year promised $44.9 million to DFO for the Commission. But every step of the way, it seems like DFO is obstructing the will of Parliament. Last year, it dragged its heels in transferring that money to the Commission. When will the President of the Treasury Board crack the whip and ensure that DFO complies with the will of Parliament and with ensuring best practices on governance?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, it's interesting that the Conservatives actually raised this question because it was in fact the Conservative members who underfunded and did not increase funding to the Great Lakes fishery. But it's a good news, Madam Speaker, in this budget we corrected the previous mistakes of Conservatives. They can continue to heckle me because they don't like the facts. The fact that we are actually investing in our Great Lakes, we're going to continue to protect them, while Conservatives allowed them to be underfunded and not take the protection of our Great Lakes seriously.
The Honourable Member for Wellington, Halton Hills.
Madam Speaker, another question. In the year before Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Canada was spending 1.28% of GDP on defence. According to NATO last week, in the year since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Canada spent 1.29% of GDP. I read the budget document, but I could not find any information about defence expenditure as a percent of GDP over the next 5 years. Will the government commit to providing this very important information to this House as soon as possible?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Defence.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the member opposite for the question. The Canadian Armed Forces plays an essential role in defending Canadians and supporting global security. We have been consistent in supporting their work, starting with our 2017 defense policy, which increased spending by over 70%. In the past year, we have made new investments in Canadian national defense totaling more than $55 million, Madam Speaker. We're also undertaking a review of our defense policy in the face of changing global environment. Rest assured, we will keep making necessary smart investments into our forces. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Thérèse de Blainville. Madam Speaker, this budget proves that Ottawa has learned nothing from its mistakes. If it learned anything from the pandemic, it's just how EI abandons workers. Ottawa has been promising to reform EI since 2015. Most people who lose their jobs will find themselves with nothing. Seasonal workers, independent workers. Why has the government refused to help these people who are losing their jobs?
Secretary.
Madam Speaker, Budget 2023 invests in seasonal workers, so they have 5 additional weeks of coverage for a total of 45 weeks. Also in Budget 2023, we propose establishing a new independent tripartite Board of Appeal to hear cases regarding employment insurance claims. We know Canada's EI system is complex, and that's why we're focused on improving it. In the past 2 years, Madam Speaker, the Minister has led more than 35 virtual national and regional roundtables with workers, with employers, and academics. EI reform is a priority of this government, Madam Speaker. We are on it, and we will get it done. Thank you.
The Honourable Member. Madam Speaker, all Ottawa learned from the pandemic, all it got was a debt. Now, Ottawa should have a $24 billion surplus in the EI kitty. This from workers' contributions. But the government, why doesn't it use this to reform EI? It's taking workers' money to pay for their debt contracted during the pandemic. Why not use this money to protect them instead of paying down their pandemic debt at workers' expense? Madam Speaker, we respect workers a great deal, and during the pandemic, we used every EI system. The Minister decided to modernize the system, modernize the EI system. Madam Speaker, we're continuing the work. We should have a solid plan to help workers.
Madam Speaker, the budget still allows the automatic tax increase to take place tonight on beer, wine, and spirits. Under this Liberal government, simple pleasures like enjoying beer with friends after work or a bottle of wine over dinner with a loved one have become unaffordable luxuries for working Canadians. Will the government commit today to support my bill, C-266, and cancel the automatic annual tax increase on beer, wine, and spirits?
The Honourable Minister of Tourism.
Madam Speaker, I've said it in this House already this week, and I'll say it again. We listened to Canadians. We worked with the industry. We worked with our Liberal caucus that leaned in on this issue. And Madam Speaker, we are going to pause the escalator tax on beer, wine, and spirit for 1 year at 2%. Madam Speaker, it was going to be less than a cent for a can of beer. Now it's going to be even less per can of beer. Madam Speaker, we're with the tourism industry. We're with this sector. We're going to support them. We've heard from Canadians. We made the right move.
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Rocky Ridge.
Madam Speaker, we're in the middle of an affordability crisis. Any tax increase is too much. The tax was too high to begin with. There is no room for any more tax. The budget adds $4,200 in new costs for every Canadian family, more spending, more taxes, more debt. That means more inflation. Canadians can't even afford basic necessities like food, housing, and transportation. And tonight, the tax on beer, wine, and spirits is going up, just like it does every year automatically under this government. Why won't this Liberal government commit today that it will cancel the automatic annual tax increase on beer, wine, and spirit?
Honourable Minister of Tourism.
Madam Speaker, The Conservative opposition has a golden opportunity to support Canadians in a time of high inflation by supporting our budget. Madam Speaker, they have no record to stand on when it comes to taxes. When we lowered not once, not twice, but 3 times taxes on middle-class Canadians, how do the Conservatives vote? Against. When we reduced taxes on workers, Madam Speaker, how do the Conservatives vote? Against. When we lowered taxes across the board, Madam Speaker, once again, they voted against. They've got a phobia of us supporting Canadians. Thank goodness we've got Canadians' backs.
The Honourable Member for Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston.
Madam Speaker, the Immigration Minister's program to admit the families of language and cultural advisors who assisted our troops in Afghanistan has such rigid criteria that it will freeze out almost everybody it should be helping. For example, only those who were still in Afghanistan after July 22nd, 2021 are eligible. So this rules out the Afghans who were in the most dangerous parts of the country and who therefore had to flee their homes before the Taliban overran their regions. These family members are now trapped in third countries and are in danger of being transported back to Afghanistan, where they will be killed. Will the minister change these restrictive criteria to fix the mess he's created?
Excellent. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Immigration.
Madam Speaker, I want to say thanks to the member for his question and actually his advocacy. You know, I said it in the House, and I'll say it again today, because if it was a matter of will, there would be 40,000 Afghan refugees here already. But we know that in the reality that everything that has been happening, there's been challenges and obstacles, Madam Speaker, and we're working very hard in addressing those through, for instance, Bill C-41. You know, there's numbers of factors, Madam Speaker, that we do not fully control, and that is a safe passage. Merci.
The Honourable Member for Pierrefonds-Dollard. Madam Speaker, Canada's priorities around innovation and the economy are evolving as we continue to give pride of place to clean growth, good jobs, and investing for the future. Budget 2023 contains new measures that show the importance this government attaches to innovation, science, and industry. Can the minister highlight the measures for stimulating the economy, helping the environment, and creating good quality jobs? The Honourable Minister. I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for an excellent question, and let me discuss these measures because the Honourable Member is quite right. We do have, for example, a manufacturing technology credit, credit for clean hydrogen, credit for electricity. But what I would like to highlight, and the people I'd like to thank, are Canadian workers. Because of their savoir-faire, their expertise, we will be scoring record investments. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker, the cover-up continues. It's been a month since the Prime Minister's National Security Advisor and the Director of CSIS committed to providing the dates upon which the Prime Minister was briefed about Beijing's election interference. 1 month later, and still no response. All the Prime Minister needs to do is check his calendar. When will the Prime Minister stop the obstruction, stop the cover-up, and give us the dates?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, on the contrary, the PROC committee has been working diligently on this issue, continuing to hold more meetings to bring in more witnesses as opposition members have requested, and we support that. Madam Speaker, we'll continue to work with the committee to find the most appropriate time because the committee has other business as well, but this is a top priority to ensure that we are dealing with the issues of foreign interference, and we'll continue to work hard on that.
Honorable député de Mégantic-L'Érable.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Madam Speaker, the Liberals are now champions of involving family members in appointing them. But there's someone in the Prime Minister's office who thought it would be a good idea to make the sister-in-law of a Liberal minister interim ethics commissioner. When will the Prime Minister end his hypocrisy and put an end to this appointment, the appointment of the sister-in-law of his best friend?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Just to emphasize once again that the interim ethics commissioner is a career public servant who has served in a senior role in the ethics commissioner's office for more than 10 years, beginning when the Harper government was in office. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for Malpeque.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, families in my riding in Malpeque are benefiting from the important and significant savings thanks to our government's early learning childcare program. But they are concerned that the future of another government, like the one that campaigned against our childcare program, would cut the program. Can the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Family, Children and Social Development highlight to this House how it is supporting families across PEI and also how we are progressing in enacting this important social program into legislation?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I want to thank the member from Malpeque for his question and his hard work for families. Madam Speaker, I'm so glad to report that Prince Edward Island, as well as provinces and territories across the country, are taking important steps to make childcare affordable for Canadian families. In fact, PEI announced that they cut fees by 50% last December. Daycare fees are coming down, new spaces are being created, and wages are increasing for early childhood educators. We know how critical this is because the childhood educator workforce are the foundation of our system. Madam Speaker, we need to make sure that the people who take care of our children are respected and well compensated.
The Honourable Member for Winnipeg Centre.
Madam Speaker, the Mass Casualty Commission released a scathing report yesterday. It made clear that gender-based violence is not treated with the urgency and seriousness it deserves. To save lives, police must change the way they respond to reports of gender-based violence. We cannot remain idle. Lives are at risk. This government has an obligation to act with meaningful police reform, including addressing the culture of systemic racism within the RCMP. Will the Liberals implement these recommendations without delay? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
I thank my colleague for the question. Of course, the tragic events in Nova Scotia nearly 3 years ago, devastated the nation. Our government is working hard to ensure that every woman has the support they need and a place to sleep each and every night. We continue to make investments to ensure that is the case, including in the budget just announced the other day with $160 million starting this year for women's programs to ensure we're supporting shelters and women.
The Honourable Member for Richmond-Arthabasca. Madam Speaker, we learned that the Governor General spent $700,000 for a 4-day trip to Germany, $75,000 for 4 nights in the most luxurious hotels. And you can add this to $80,000 spent for meals aboard a plane during a trip to the Middle East. This means $2,600 for food per person on the plane. This is indecent, Madam Speaker. Can the Prime Minister tell us if he approved of these expenditures? And if not, what has he done to put an end to the squandering of funds once and for all? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Madam Speaker, it's very important to remember that the Governor General was on a trip, and what was spent for this trip was similar to what was spent for former Governors General. But, Madam Speaker, we must acknowledge that when a representative of our nation travels with a delegation and works on several files, well, I can tell you that we are aware of this, as is the Governor General, and we will continue to watch expenses. And that is all the time we have for question period today.